Righty, thank you, Heather. So as you can see, the title here is Feelings, Nothing More Than Feelings, if you're familiar with that song. As Heather said, my name is Glenn Merrill. I'm an LCSW licensed clinical social worker. First, I'm going to talk a smidge about the Blomquist-Hale benefit. Working for a company with the Blomquist-Hale benefit, you can get help with any life challenge and talk with a licensed therapist about that. And it doesn't have to be work related. That's one of those where I used to work for the state, which has Blomquist-Hale benefits. And there was one point where I was like super burned out and I needed to talk to someone. And my boss even said, hey, we'll get you set up with Blomquist-Hale. But I was thinking in my mind, oh, wait, I'm still going to work. I'm fine. I don't need it. And I totally needed it and I should have used it. It's free. It's part of the benefit. It's 100% confidential, right? I don't call up and say, hey, by the way, I met with Sally and Joe today and here's what we talked about. No. All we report are numbers for utilization and billing, but that's nothing personal or identifiable. We can do phone, video, and in person, right? That's one where as Heather said, I'm in the Ogden office. I'm also in the Farmington office. We've got offices down in Orem, in the Salt Lake area, all the way up in Logan. Give us a call. We do have a 24-hour crisis line, so that'll get you hooked up and talking to a licensed therapist, whether that's relationship stuff or things like that, anything. If you feel it as a crisis, you can talk to someone. Most days for appointments, we've got anywhere in the morning, even to the evenings, and there's our number right there to call. So now I didn't talk to Heather tons about this, but you'll notice the rest of my slides don't look like this, just with the white, because I find it super boring. So just pretend the rest of them say Blomquist-Hale, okay? So nothing more than feelings. So feelings, what do they mean and what do they do? Now here's, this slide was titled disclaimer, but that sounds a little bit like I don't know what I'm talking about. But this can be a tricky subject because even researchers with many more years of experience than me have a hard time defining emotion and feelings. So I don't give this as this is the absolute truth. This is the only thing that they can mean. As Alan Fridlin once said, the only thing certain in the emotion field is that no one agrees on how to define emotion. So I'm putting that out there first because I am not the end-all be-all of feelings. But we're going to start here with Brene Brown, and you're going to hear her name a lot if you're ever in my office or things like that. She's a wonderful researcher, a wonderful author. She has several books. She's got some TED Talks. But she says, without understanding how our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors work together, it's almost impossible to find our way back to ourselves and each other. When we don't understand how our emotions shape our thoughts and decisions, we become disembodied from our own experiences and disconnected from each other. And that's in this book, Atlas of the Heart, which I'm using a lot, and I highly recommend it. And we'll talk more about it as we go along. But I added the emphasis there under the emotions, how they shape our thoughts and decisions. And you notice my little line down here, feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. And I could have done this as a triangle or a circle because that all influence. My behaviors get influenced by feelings. My feelings influence behaviors. My thoughts influence my feelings. That it goes all directions. But we have to be able to figure out, what do feelings mean? What do they do? Right? Because often we just know they feel bad and we try and get away from it. So I'm going to put it to you that feelings are signals. Right? You notice we've got our little gas gauge here in the background. And as we look at our gas gauge helps us know what's going on. How many more miles do we have left on our car? How are we going? Right? And when it gets down there in the red, whoo, there's some feelings going on. Uh-oh, I might feel worried. I might feel nervous. Right? Some people, I might feel like, I've got 50 more miles in here. But it's important to understand what those feelings mean. Now, we see my little guy here on the side of my screen. What do we feel like he's feeling or going through? You can shout it out or throw it in chat there. Oh, there we go. Pain, 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 discomfort. I love it. I love it. So that's kind of what I'm getting to, right? Now, if any of you are mothers or fathers and have kids, they might, there we go. Say this, Mom, my stomach feels bad. Now, this, when the kid comes up to you and says, Mom, my stomach feels bad, if you're anything like me or like my wife, you kind of go to detective mode. So what things might cause this little guy's stomach to feel bad? Oh, could be laughing. We've got one of those on there. That's a possibility. Oh, candy. We've got someone saying candy that maybe ate too much candy. Food poisoning. All right, we got some sickness maybe going on there. Needs the bathroom. Injury. Worry. Ooh, I love these. This is great. I love this feedback. Hungry. Very simple. Definitely. You guys are right on the money here, right? Because as we look at it, right, stomach feeling bad could come from different things. As someone pointed out, I could be hungry. They could be too full. I don't know about you, but Thanksgiving, oh, my stomach feels bad because I eat too much, right? We've got like the heartburn, maybe it's something spicy, or someone said candy, right? Stomach ache from too much sugar. We've got the sickness. Is that food poisoning? Is that, a stomach bug going around? Or does he just need to go to the bathroom? Right? Because we have to find out the need behind this feeling in order to solve it, right? Because the solution to I'm hungry is very different than the solution to I'm too full, right? So as we look at it, these feelings point towards needs, right? Because if I'm hungry, I need to eat. If I'm full, I need to wait. If I have heartburn, I need, maybe an antacid. Right? Oh, I do love the belly laughing. That's what I hope. That'd be nice. Let's see here. All right. Now you notice we got our monster back here. Oftentimes we try to escape uncomfortable feelings with things that just make us feel better, right? The feeling itself, right? The uncomfortable feeling, ooh, we say we want to get away from that. So as I click here, sometimes we have the bad feeling, and then sometimes we try and escape that with a bad habit, right? And what are maybe some of those ways that we try and escape the bad feelings that don't necessarily deal with the underlying feeling? Oh, there we go. Someone says they love to eat their feelings. It's a huge one. Oreo cookies, right? They taste good. They make us feel better. How else? Drink, right? Whether that's going to Fizz, and getting that Dr. Pepper, or that could be the alcohol kind of drinking. Ooh, sleep. Sleep our feelings away. Yes, right? We just turn everything off. Oh, someone else saying take a nap, keep to myself. Work. There we go. Sometimes we got to stay busy. Go for a walk. There we go. Dissociate can be a good one. Exercise. Now again, not every way that we escape bad feelings is necessarily evil or bad. Right? Love these. These are great answers. Digging the dirt. Okay. I don't know if that means like landscaping or things like that. Gardening, crafting. Excellent. Let's hop over here. Sometimes these escape actions, right? Because you're right on. These are a lot of ways that we do that. But a lot of times escape actions don't meet the needs behind those feelings, right? So like we say, if we just take a nap, now if our problem is that we're tired, yes, nap is the perfect thing. But if the problem is, oh, I've got this presentation I have to do on Thursday, I need, a million more slides, taking a nap, it makes me feel better, but it doesn't solve the problem. It's making me stressed out. So let's see. So why I want to talk about this, some of the feelings specifically, is if I'm feeling loneliness, fear, boredom, those are very specific feelings, and they're uncomfortable feelings. They don't feel good. We don't like them, right? And if we're escaping by, eating the cookies and sweets, drinking the alcohol, taking drugs, shopping, right? A little retail therapy, right? You can see how these escape actions, even though they might feel good or feel better, aren't going to make this little monster go away, right? It gives us a little bit of a lead on him for a minute, but it doesn't solve the underlying issue. So knowing the specific feeling helps us identify and fulfill the underlying need, right? Just like with that little guy, if his stomach is feeling bad, if it's feeling bad because, oh, he needs to go to the bathroom, oh, I know how to solve that, right? You go to the bathroom, right? Oh, you need to eat. Okay. My son came, this was over Christmas. We were visiting my folks, and my son goes up to my wife and he's all worried. He says, Mom, I'm feeling dizzy. And it's like 11 o'clock. My wife says, well, have you eaten anything today? No. Well, go eat something. Because he's worried he's sick or dying or something like that. When really it's like, oh, you're hungry there, little dude. You need to get something to eat. So as we mentioned, if I'm hungry, I need food. If I'm thirsty, I need water. If I'm lonely, I need connection. That's really what that means. If I feel lonely, I'm feeling disconnected. I'm feeling far apart. And taking a nap, dissociating, digging in the garden, right, might help feel better for a little bit. But if I don't get that connection, as soon as I'm finished with whatever my escape activity is, that's going to come back and I'm still going to feel bad. All right. Ooh, frustrated, right? This is one we feel all the time. Frustrated is connected with expectations, right? If I have a recipe and the recipe says, takes 30 minutes, right? How am I feeling when I hit minute 45 or 50 and I'm still not eating dinner? I feel frustrated. But if I can recognize, I feel frustrated. Oh, that has to do with my expectations. Oh, let's take a look at my expectations, right? Oh, a look at the recipe. Yes, because half an hour. Now, sometimes maybe my expectation is off. Yes, cooking time, half an hour. Prep time, half an hour. Oh, I've got to modify that expectation. Or sometimes I have to say, all right, even though the recipe says half an hour, if I've never made it before, it's probably going to take me a little bit longer. Ooh, violated. That's a feeling that sometimes we feel. That's kind of an uncomfortable feeling. It has to do with boundaries. Has someone crossed the boundary? And if I recognize I feel violated, I need to figure out what boundary was crossed, who crossed that boundary, and how do I enforce that boundary? Let's see. Oh, I'm going to back up a second. Is this making sense so far? Questions that you have, because this is a great part. Here we go. Irene says it makes sense. Anyone have, because again, we're going to dive in more, but I want to check in. So I'm not just running off without you. There we go. What do you do when you don't know what is causing the feeling? Ooh, I love it. Reggie, thank you. What a great question. We're going to dive in a little bit about that. Someone mentioned about sometimes we've jumped the fence boundary and not known there was one. Ooh, that's one. I love talking to people about boundaries because often we have a hard time expressing the boundary. Sometimes we don't even express it in the first place. Sometimes when I'm giving a presentation, in front of a big group of people, when I'm talking about how we tend to feel uncomfortable when someone crosses our boundary, is I'll scoot towards the very front row. And they always do something like this, and I'll kind of laugh. I'll say, come on, I showered this morning. I'm putting on deodorant. Because no one at the beginning had said, all right, Glenn, you better stay way up there and we're going to stay back here. That was never an expressed boundary, but it was sort of an implied boundary. So let's jump into this on this question of how do we do if we're not sure what is causing that feeling? Because that's a great point. And another Brene Brown quote. She talks about how she was doing these, I can't remember if they were seminars or classes, but over the course of 5 years, they would do these seminars and they would give these surveys of like, what feelings are you feeling? What feelings can you identify? And she said, over the course of 5 years, we collected these surveys asking participants to list emotions from more than 7,000 people. The average number of emotions named across the survey was 3. The emotions were happy, sad, and angry, right? And that's part of it, because if I can't identify what is the feeling, right? Because just that, like that little kid going, oh, right? You named several different things. Oh, maybe he's sick, maybe he's hungry, maybe he's laughing, maybe he's in pain, right? If we can't identify it, how do we know how to fix it? Right? So we think about this. Three emotions was the average, right? Could you imagine going to a car mechanic that could only identify 3 problems on a car? Right? So it's one of those where, okay, is it, oh, yep, it's either the transmission, the oil, or the fuel pump, right? If that was the only thing, right? Too bad if your alternator's out, right? If you can't identify it. Or a doctor that can only identify 3 diseases, right? It's important that we build this language of the feelings, right? Because part of it, as we look, oh, come on. Oh, here we go. I love this example that we think of, say, football, how we describe feelings and how we identify them affects how we think about them. How do we interact? How do we share about these, right? Because if someone had never seen a football game in their whole entire life, and I pull up, I say, all right, here's a clip from a football game, and I need you to tell me what's going on, right? The first person might kind of sound like this first one here. Well, there's a bunch of guys wearing helmets that run around and are falling down. Right? Who knows what's going on? Versus someone who really knows football, they will say, they're 3rd and 2, so they're going to give it to the running back to make the first down. Now, someone who doesn't know football is like, what in the world are you talking about? What's going on here? But as someone who knows football, I have, 4 tries to try and, get the ball farther down, and they're pretty close on the 3rd try, so they're going to try this certain type of action, this play, to keep going so they get another set of downs, right? And emotions, it's kind of the same thing. Do we have that vocabulary? Let's check here. Okay, we've got someone here saying, I hold all my emotions in until a breaking point. What are ways to express feelings? Great question, right? Because often what happens, that's kind of the next part that I wanted to get into. Ooh, let's see. We'll dive right into this. Um, is starting right here that I pull this up. This is called the feelings wheel. It's on feelingswheel.com. And this is the one that I want to make sure I send everyone a copy of this with the slides, right? That first, before we even express them, we've got to identify them, right? That we say, what is the feeling that I'm feeling, right? And I love this one, the way it's set up, that we look here in the middle and we see some of those basic ones. We see happy, sad, angry, right? But just like little kid grabbing his stomach, those aren't super specific. Now you look under angry, and we have one of these right here, like frustrated. Aha, Glenn told me that frustrated has to do with expectations. Gee, what are my expectations looking like? Or, ooh, violated is over here. Or even over here under anxious, we have overwhelmed, right? If I'm recognizing, I feel overwhelmed, ooh, that usually means too much. Or we look down here at ooh, guilty. Guilty usually means, I feel like I've done something wrong. Now, guilty, it's interesting. There's only two things you can do about guilty. Either I have to fix the behavior I feel is wrong, or I have to take a look at the belief, right? I talk about boundaries all the time, and I love some of the comments are about boundaries. And I'd love to, I could do a whole presentation about boundaries. Is I had a lady, and we talked a whole hour about boundaries in my office. And she came back the next time and she said, Glenn, I learned I can say no and still be a good person. Because she had felt bad. She had felt guilty about holding boundaries, especially with family, telling people, no, that's now, no, it's not a good time to come, visit or things like that. And so being able to recognize, oh, I was feeling guilty, which was causing some of the stress and this bad feeling, but recognizing, oh, I'm allowed to have boundaries. It's not this bad, wrong, horrible, terrible thing to say, nope, today doesn't work for me. That's all right. So we have to start off before we can express it, or sometimes we have to ask, what is our body saying? Right? Do I feel this in my stomach? Do I feel this in my shoulders? Can I process how am I feeling? I know I have a slide later for that, but we might have to jump into it. Let me check again here. Oh, I love this back and forth. Oh, thank you, Katie, for grabbing that. Feelingswheel.com, that link there. Being able to listen or talk. And so as we start to recognize, what do we have for the emotions? What am I feeling? What's going on? Because I want to dive into the second part, that it isn't always even just vocabulary. Sometimes it's about permission, right? So I've listed a couple here, right? And I have them in quotation marks because I don't believe these are true statements, but these are ones that we hear all the time, right? So like this first one, real men don't cry, right? Or you're so tough. Or I had one where I was working with a woman and she talked about how her sister had some pretty serious mental health issues and stuff like that. And so she always heard this third one, you're the easy child. And so she had kind of learned, I'm not allowed to have problems, right? Because I'm the easy one. I'm the one that's easy to go along. So if I bring something up, uh-oh, I'm being mean, I'm being bad, or I'm not meeting this expectation of I'm supposed to be, this good, upstanding person. Or I'm, I'm being a burden on my parents by bringing something up. So sometimes we have to recognize of, all right, what's preventing us from expressing these feelings, right? That sometimes, do I need a good cry? Sometimes do I need to go to the smash it place and, break some glasses or an old TV or something like that? Or sometimes it's this feeling of, ooh, if I share it, is that going to be protected or oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Value, right? Because if I say, gee, I'm having just a really tough day, I'm having a hard time. And someone says, well, gee, let me tell you about my day and how it's so much worse. We think, okay, I guess my feelings don't matter. Guess I'm not really important. I love what you said there, Irene. Yes, we need to feel safe, right? That's part of why at therapist's office, I tell people like 70% of my job or more is listening. Yeah, tell me about that. Tell me what that's feeling. I bet you're feeling this way. It sounds like you're feeling a little bit of this. Is that right? Because too often we get this sort of feeling of, ooh, I'm not supposed to be weak. I'm not supposed to be vulnerable. I'm supposed to be put together. I'm supposed to be tough. I'm supposed to be strong. And some of these shoulds, these supposed tos, just start eating at us. All right. And that's why I love having presentations, conversations like this. How am I feeling? What does this mean? Oh, I'm reading through this one. This one looks great. Talking about metaphors. I absolutely love metaphors and analogies. Anyone who's in my office knows I love my analogies. I love my metaphors. I love movie quotes, of here's kind of what it's about. They're saying they like the feeling of, oh, like a volcano about to explode. I feel like a wildfire. I feel like a thunderstorm. Instead of saying angry or maybe clarifying anger. And so being able to, and I love that because that's a way of saying this is more than just mad, right? Or sometimes I feel like I'm on the edge of something, or I feel like I'm underwater, right? That's one that I feel like a lot, or that I hear a lot, that I feel underwater. And that's one where I could say, overwhelmed. There's too much. I can't breathe. I can't stay on top of it. And that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. And I don't know why I went backwards. That's what I get for trying to look at chat as well. Now, this one at the bottom, right? I have a lot of men, especially, they'll come into my office and say, Glenn, I have anger issues. And I'll say, well, okay, sure. I'm not sure if I believe you, but tell me about it. Now, I don't say like, I don't. But often what happens is sometimes that escape action is anger. It's yelling or screaming or things like that because in some ways that's more of an acceptable way to express emotions is I'm going to yell, I'm going to scream. Because sometimes, especially for men, that is more like appropriate or acceptable than maybe crying or maybe saying, gee, I'm a little nervous about this. Yeah, man. Oh, there we go. Denied. Right, because sometimes we feel like, I'm not allowed to express this emotion. I'm not allowed to say it or have this conversation. Right. Now, here's a comic. I love this one. This is from the Doghouse Diaries. And I'll read it out as you look at it. And so it's the woman talking to a man, and the woman says, you never tell me what you're thinking. Why don't you guys ever just talk about your feelings? And the guy says, I don't know. I guess I'm just afraid I'll look weak. I don't like feeling insecure. That vulnerability really scares me. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm not strong enough, and that doubt makes me sad. There's a frame of just her kind of staring at him. He's got his head down. And then she says, I am extremely unattracted to you right now. Now, I was sitting in a session and I showed this to a fellow I was working with, talking about, feelings and permission. And I showed this to him and we read over it and he kind of chuckled a little bit, but then he kind of points, he says, I've had that conversation. I said, oh, really? Tell me about that. And he says, well, I was dating this girl and she said, you never cry in front of me. And he said, kind of thought about that for a while and then was thinking about it. And he kind of psyched himself up is kind of the wrong word for that, but he really made an effort to try and feel more open and vulnerable around her. And he started crying in front of her. He had lost a family member to suicide. And that's, part of what was going on with him emotionally. And he said, but here's the problem. He said, it wasn't very long until this girl he was dating said, well, if I'd have known you were going to cry this much, I wouldn't have said anything. Which kind of reinforced, see, I'm not supposed to share emotions. I'm not supposed to be vulnerable. I'm not supposed to, cry in front of someone because I'm supposed to be big, tough, and strong. So this can be an uphill battle of one recognizing, what are some of the barriers between expressing my emotions? Sometimes you have to take a look and say, all right, who are the people that I do feel safe around, that I'm willing to share, that's going to take my feelings seriously and respond to them in an appropriate way, right? That's one where we have to feel that out a little bit, right? Of being able to see that. Questions on this or reactions with this one? Give you a minute to type there.
I had someone write in, they said, how much does our work environment affect us and our emotions? Inconsistent standards, et cetera, et cetera. How do you handle that? I came from a place that felt very much so like a high school drama, the popular ones in quotations, and the outcasts in quotations. Navigating workspaces is the hardest place for emotions.
Okay. It's a great question. All right, so hang on. I'm writing myself a little note here because I want to make sure I answer each part of that. So we've got the work environment, we've got the drama, the inconsistent part. What else, Heather?
Yeah, so just the inconsistencies and then like the clicks. So he or she has
Yep.
clicked with their
Definitely. Definitely. Okay. Because I would also say probably on top of that, there's also, oh, we are supposed to be professional and we're supposed, again, some of those supposed to words coming out. So part of it when it comes to that inconsistency, right? If we're gonna, I'm gonna zip back here to my feelings wheel. We'll get to Mr. Rogers. I love Mr. Rogers too. But I want to get back to my feelings wheel here a little bit because you're hitting on several of these different ones, right? So for example, we've got here's some of the fearful. So like insecure is one that's underneath there. Because inconsistency, hang on, am I going to get in trouble for this? Even though like this is what we're told, this is what's supposed to happen. Or rejected. That's one where it's like, wait, I'm part of this team too, but because I'm not part of the clique or I'm not part of the in crowd, oh, that's part of what it is. And if I look at this feeling of rejected, oh, that isn't just even the same as lonely. Lonely, I want connection. Rejection is I want acceptance. I want to feel like I'm good enough. Right. So sometimes you have to recognize, all right, is, do I need acceptance from this group? Or some of it, do I just need to figure out how do I work with this group, even though I think they're a bunch of knuckleheads, for having their clicks or things like that. When you look at some of the inconsistency, we say, okay, hang on, do I know what's expected? Or do I know how that's going to be, say, enforced regularly? Because if it's not, it's one of those where it's like, all right, hang on, I'm out. If we didn't know what time the sun was going to come up, if we didn't know what time our alarm was going to go off, yeah, that's going to affect us. Because the first part of that question is, how much does work affect us? The answer is usually a lot. We're there a lot of the day. We have a lot of social interaction there. And not only social interaction, we've got social interaction with different power dynamics, right? This isn't just me talking with my friend of saying, hey, like, why'd you eat the last potato chip, right? It's the difference between, hang on, you're chewing me out in front of everyone else about this report, even though like no one else in the team has done any of this. So we're hitting so many of these of, is there power differential? Do I feel good enough? Do I feel rejected? Do I feel, we can look at some of these other ones. Oh, disappointed. Do I feel inferior? I'm pointing, I don't know if they can see my mouse on here. Am I feeling inferior of where things are? And the answer is there's a lot to navigate there because there are so many of these expectations, so many of these shoulds, and we have a lot of different dynamics that bring certain things like power dynamics, like how are we utilizing that social interaction. So the quick answer to that question is how much does work affect our feelings? Lots, lots. And recognizing where some of these are coming from. Because again, if I feel rejected, ooh, maybe I don't feel like I'm good enough. Maybe some of that I don't feel good enough for my job, or no, I feel like I'm doing my work really well, but they're not asking me out, to the employee happy hour afterwards or whatever. Right? That's two separate things where it's like, okay, how's my work doing? Do I feel good enough in my work? How am I doing on a personal social level with much more unclear rules? Right? Social rules usually are a lot less stated or explained versus work rules. They say, Glenn, you're going to meet with these people at this time. I say, great, wonderful. Right? Versus, who's going to be my best friend? I love it. Irene says that when a man shows vulnerability to me in a relationship, I see that as a chance to grow as a couple. Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe, and it might have been Brene Brown, it might not. So if it isn't, I'm sorry, Brene. But she says that intimacy requires vulnerability. Now, I'm not just talking about like sexual intimacy, but any sort of emotional, physical, social intimacy requires vulnerability, right? Because if I'm not vulnerable, you're outside of arm's reach, right? You're farther away. But if I say, hey, I'm vulnerable, I'm opened up to you, right? When we think of like dogs, right? When they lie on their backs, they're exposing their belly. That's vulnerable. But they're saying, hey, I trust you, right? When we look at like things, oh, thank you, Brooke. You can't see my mouse. Perfect. When we talk about like shaking hands, right? From what I understand, that came from back in the olden days. It's saying, look, my sword hand doesn't have a sword in it. And I'm getting within stabbing distance of you, right? And we're holding these sword hands. We're not going to stab each other. There's some level of trust there, right? Because it's one of those where if I don't trust you, I've got my shield, I got my sword, I'm ready to go. Like I'm protecting myself. Whereas if I say, look, there's some vulnerability here, we're going to feel closer. Excellent questions, excellent feedback. What else? I'm going to zip back to where I was, but before I move on to my Mr. Rogers, I joke, I say, Mr. Rogers is who I want to be when I grow up. And it talks about group dynamics being difficult. You're right. They say that I'm often the emotional pillar, and it can be tricky to know if it's counseling training, avoiding feelings, or being vulnerable. It's a lot, right? Because there's sometimes where it's like, okay, yes, I want to help and be supportive, but then I also see sometimes adding another complicated part of group dynamics is, am I feeling responsible for your feelings? Right? I see this a lot of times with people who have boundary issues where it's like, oh, I can't set that boundary because they might feel bad. And if I make them feel bad, that means I'm a bad person. I'm being rude, I'm being mean. Right. And how much of this is, do they want me on their side, or are they really coming to me for help? It's very hard because we can't actually read other people's minds or where they're going. Thank you. All right, we're gonna hop over here. So in Fred Rogers' presentation to the Senate on May 1st, 1969, he says, if we make it clear that feelings are mentionable and manageable, we will have done a great service for mental health. Now, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. This is great. He's testifying before the Senate basically to help get PBS more funding to keep going. And I love this phrase, right? And if ever I open up my own, company practice or something like that, this is what I want to call it, mentionable and manageable, is, can I identify what the feeling is? Can I give it a name? Do I know what that feeling is? And then, all right, what am I able to do about that? Right. In these next couple of slides, we're going to talk a little bit about what that means, what that looks like to wrap up. So, right, what do we do? So number one, vocabulary. Can I name this feeling? Right? Do I know how this feeling feels? And how do I know how this feeling feels different than this feeling? Right? Because again, stomach feels bad, right? Yeah, stomach feels bad if I'm hungry. Stomach also feels bad if I'm full. What's the difference? Sometimes I have to take a look. All right, I've got to do some thinking. I might have to do some writing. I might have to do some talking about that. Let's see. Oh, I'm jumping in on chat again. Yeah, sometimes when we get vulnerable, it gets weird or it creates distance because it's like, oh, you hear this person is being vulnerable, right? It can be very tricky. But back to this, that yes, vocabulary. Two, here we go. Permission. Am I giving myself permission to feel it? Am I giving myself permission to express it? And then three, what are the actions that I take to do about it? Right? We're going to dive into a little bit more on this. So building vocabulary, right? This is where I want to make sure you all have the feelings wheel, right? You can start to take a look at this, right? Now, some people like to start in the middle, right? I think this is an angry feeling, right? Let's look over here in the angry feeling. Now, I had one fella, we pulled the feelings wheel, and as we looked at it, because he was one of those guys that said, yes, Glenn, I have anger issues. But as we talked more, he said, oh, and he looked at that sad part of the wheel, and he said, I think I've been trying to make this purple, right? He's been trying to pull the anger over here, the red into the blue. And as he recognized, oh, I think this is more, I'm feeling guilty, right? Because sometimes if I feel guilty, it might come across as angry, right? Or sometimes if we feel lonely, right, that's something where I might slam the door, or I might, as some of you said, we might isolate, right? Because if I'm kind of growly and people say, oh, well, gee, Glenn's being a grump, so leave him alone, right? If I'm feeling lonely, crap, that's exactly what I needed. I needed that connection. But instead of saying and being vulnerable and saying, hey, I'm feeling a little bit lonely, I would like some connection, please. Gee, that's not tough and manly. I'm going to go isolate, or I'm going to go, hit the motorcycle, or I'm gonna, whatever it is, it can get turned around a little bit. As I also look at that, all right, if I feel this feeling, I feel lonely, what's the need that goes with that? If I feel overwhelmed means less, right? Overwhelmed means too much, whether that's too much noise, too many decisions, too much responsibility. Sometimes we need to pause, right? I've got to say, all right, I feel overwhelmed. Too much, all right, too much of what? Too much of some of this. And then sometimes we can look at some of the physical cues as well, right? Temperature can be one, right? Anger, aggression, anxiety to me are more of the, ooh, I'm feeling hot, my temperature is going up, right? That embarrassed, right? We talk about being flushed, turning red, that kind of thing. Versus sometimes if we're feeling more depressed or lonely, usually that's going to be more of a colder feeling, right? Part of that's the biological responses we have. Heartbeat, right? Anxious, again, usually one of those real fast heartbeat ones. Breathing, am I breathing more? Appetite can be another one of those, right? I know for me, anxiety, like I talked about that time when I was burned out, stomach was in and out. I had to force myself to eat breakfast in the morning. And that was a great signal saying, hey, Glenn, maybe you're a little stressed. Maybe you're a little overwhelmed. Maybe you feel in over your head or whatever it is. And I knew physically that was a symptom, right? And I remember consciously thinking, no, I must eat breakfast because I've got to go to work and I've got to have energy and I'm going to like choke down this bowl of oatmeal to get going. Oh, I love it. Irene says, I play the grandma card when I miss my sons and want to reconnect. That's great of being able to recognize, I want connection. Here I know I need connection. I'm going to ask for it. It's great, right? And that falls into the second one. Give yourself permission, right? And part of that is giving ourselves permission to feel uncomfortable, right? Too often we kind of view as, you're feeling bad, you're feeling uncomfortable, cut it out. I had a professor of mine whose wife had passed away of cancer, fairly young, I want to say in her 30s. And he talked about feeling a little mad at the funeral because he almost felt like he wasn't allowed to grieve. Because he's at this funeral and a lot of people were saying things like, oh, well, she's in heaven now. She's not suffering anymore. And you'll see her, in the next life, which, you know, this came from a good place. People wanted to comfort. They wanted to say the right thing. But he said the way it came across was, oh, gee, like your sadness is making me uncomfortable. Please cut it out. And so part of this is recognizing, yeah, that grief is very reasonable. The love of your life has died too early because of this horrible disease, right? Also, uncomfortable feelings aren't bad. Hunger isn't bad. It isn't wrong. It isn't, how dare you feel hungry? You shouldn't feel hungry. Now, I know I say that sometimes, right? My kid eats 2 bites of dinner and then 5 minutes later wants a snack. You shouldn't be hungry. You shouldn't be. But it's one of those where hunger isn't the shameful thing. Shouldn't be, right? Just like, oh, as a man, is sadness bad or wrong? Shouldn't be, right? There's still a lot that goes behind that, right? Sometimes we have to write about our feelings. All right, I think it might be this. You give it some space, right? What are some of these things I think I'm feeling, right? Sometimes in that process, as we put words to it, it gets a little clearer. We might have to talk to someone about it, whether that's informal, whether that's professional, right? Being able to say, hey, this is a little bit what's going on, right? Oh, okay. Yeah, hey, sometimes I feel that way too. Oh, you're planning something big. Ooh, that stresses me out too. Right? We give permission because if I don't give permission, right? Because if I feel sad and I'm not supposed to feel sad. Not only do I feel sad now, I also feel insecure or I'm doing the wrong thing. Now maybe ashamed. Now look, I've got like 3 emotions that I'm going to try and run away from using the Oreo cookies, or the TV or the video games, right? Instead of just, yeah, I feel sad. That's what I'm feeling right now. Now, where we get into the action part, right? That sometimes we have to identify what are our escape actions. Sometimes the unhealthy ones are the ones that are, again, if I feel lonely, Oreo cookies, I have not figured out how many Oreo cookies it takes to feel less lonely or to solve that need for connection, right? It's more than like 8 at least, right? And sometimes we can see some of these, like screens, for example, wonderful little dopamine factories. Do I feel bored? Do I feel sad? Do I feel lonely? Screen, here's my dopamine. Yay. Right? Sometimes that might be addiction, gambling, shopping, drugs. Sometimes the escape action are some of these, when we get irritable or the rage, right? Sometimes we recognize this of, this is making me feel better. And I say that in the quotation marks, I feel better, but it's not solving the underlying issue, right? Because I have to identify, here's the feeling, here's the need. What action is going to move me towards that need? Now, sometimes that's going to be tricky, right? If I feel lonely, I need connection. Ooh, it's the middle of the night, right? Can I maybe even write a text and not send it? Can I write a note? Is that something? Can I make a plan? All right, tomorrow at 9, I'm going to call my buddy John or whatever it is. All right. So, look, I even said that. Right? Sending a text, taking a break or a rest. If that's something where if I recognize, I'm tired, right? Maybe I didn't get the best sleep last night, right? Limiting overwhelming stimuli. If, again, expectations, if that's a frustrating thing, if that's an expectation thing. If I feel numb, how do I feel? And I love these back and forth about deserving love and recognizing that, I love this too. Daniel says, if I write it out, then I feel like I did the work first. Then it's okay for me to ask for support or advice from others. I love that, right? Because that's showing, sometimes that can fight that should. Yes, I am working on it. I am doing some of this processing. Okay, I can share. Here's what it is. Here's what I've discovered. I think here's where I am on the feelings. Thank you for sharing that. Right. So, because I know we're basically out of time today, so I'm going to end with this, right? of feelings needing to be mentionable and manageable, right? Do I know what I'm feeling? Have I taken a look at this? So like I said, I'm gonna give that feelings wheel to Heather, right? I've got a black and white version that's much easier on the printers, right, to send and the website, to start taking a look. What are some of these feelings? How are they different? Right now, like I mentioned, this book, Atlas of the Heart, I didn't, quote tons and tons of it, but it's almost like an encyclopedia, right? So like, ooh, this one, she talks about empathy right here. Here's what empathy means. Here's what that looks like. If you look at the table of contents on this one, let's pull it up. She says, places we go when things are uncertain, and that's stress, overwhelm, anxiety. Places we go when it's beyond us, awe, wonder, confusion, curiosity. I want to say there's 87 feelings in here where it's almost like here's the encyclopedia definition of what this feeling is, where it comes from, and what it's connected to. Right now, I'm not saying you have to go out and buy this book, to get anything out of this presentation, but even just taking a look at that feelings wheel, say, all right, like get out the feelings wheel, get out the dictionary, or get out Google. All right, what does this word mean? What is that connected with? Or sometimes a good tool can be, all right, what's its opposite? If I feel lonely, what's the opposite of that to connect? All righty. And like Heather said, any other questions? Because I know we still have a few minutes for any other questions or things like that. But that is basically the end of this one. Another book that I didn't mention specifically, but it's this one. It's called Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Life of Boys. And if I were to sum up this book in a sentence or two, it's basically society tells boys don't have emotions, and then is shocked when boys have emotional problems. And it talks about some of this. It dives into some of like the generational stuff, right? That so many boys say, well, I never saw dad cry, never heard dad say I love you. And they talk about some of this. And they also talk about how baked in it almost is in our culture. Even one of the guys, one of the authors talks about a time where he and his son were driving through a canyon. It was late, it was dark, it was raining, and they get through it. And he said, I was white knuckling it. He gets through it and he looked in the rearview mirror and he says, I almost said this. Well, gee, you weren't scared, right? Which is basically saying, well, if you were scared, you better not have been. And he said, luckily, I caught myself and said, gee, that was kind of scary, huh? And being able to recognize that even some of the ways that we think about it or talk about it unknowingly can continue this. So this is another one that I highly recommend. And when it comes to recognizing what is some of the messaging there, what are some of the other things that we do?
Someone's saying, what's the name of the book again? Is it the ones that are on your screen?
Yes, yes. So we have Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. And that's one of her latest ones that specifically says here what the feelings are, here's what they mean. And then the other one that I didn't mention as much, but really falls into that one, like the Doghouse Diaries, comic is really this one, Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Life of Boys. I love both of them, and they're great reads, absolutely. And then just a reminder on the feelings wheel, that's the website right there. I'm going to send the black and white one as a PDF to Heather. That way you've got it. You can print it off. You can show it to your kids. You can color it in yourself. And then this is the specific comic on that one.
Someone said, what make the causes of attachment? What make the causes of attachment issues?
Oh boy. So attachment issues, that's one where that can be pretty deep. When we look at, to put it shortly, right, is attachment issues really boil down to kind of what is the expectation of how do we form attachments? What do attachments mean? Right. So, for example, if I had learned as a very early child, yeah, people are going to be there, people are going to support me, I'm much more likely to have a secure attachment. But if I grew up in an environment where it's like, ooh, I'm not sure if I can trust you, I'm not sure I can rely on you, that's going to be more of this maybe anxious attachment. Are you really going to be there? Are you not? And that's like the two-sentence version. I mean, there are whole books and things about attachment, but a lot of it can be with, how do I expect relationships to go? How have my relationships been? Right? We look at, how our relationships with our parents, especially. Now, I mean, I know Freud gets a lot of crap, but you look at it and how we have our first relationship sort of makes that blueprint of what do relationships look like. Let's see, the managing phrase that treats the feeling more healthy on the second last. All right, let's back up here. Let me back up for you. Oh, here we go. So the feelings need to be mentionable and manageable, right? So on that one flow is that we need to be able to express our emotions, and then how do we deal with that? And so that's where I have some of this. We try and stop just escape actions, right? And we recognize what are the actual needs with this, right? Because again, Oreo cookies, right now, I'm not saying Oreo cookies are evil and terrible and awful, but if my problem is I feel overwhelmed, I feel anxious, I feel lonely, Oreo cookies, even though they make me feel better, right? They've got the sugar and the fat and that wonderful crunch. And if you have, a big glass of cold milk, yes, I feel good, but it's not actually managing any of the feelings. Just like if I'm feeling hungry, if that's the feeling that I'm feeling, if I watch TV, right, that's going to push away that hungry feeling for a while, right? If I'm watching a great show, but as soon as that show's over, oh, wait, I'm still hungry. Because even though it made me feel better, it made me forget that uncomfortable feeling, came right back because I didn't actually deal with it.